All right. Okay. So we are live. I think I'm going to go over some questions that I've been getting this week and then see if anybody shows up and we can keep talking if that is the case. But if not, I will hop off. As I said in my previous video announcing this live, I do have social anxiety, so going live is very daunting for me. But at the same time, I want to make sure that we are answering some of the questions that we got. So let me pull it up. I also don't know what I'm doing. So there's that. Let's see. Log in. Actually don't know what I'm doing in terms of logging in. Okay. I will have to do this from memory, so that's fine. All right, so some questions that I got in anticipation of this live. The first thing that I want to go over is counselor recommendations, which a lot of students aren't aware is a thing. The thing about counselor recommendations for college admissions is that when you're doing counselor recommendations, not every school does these for admissions purposes. So we do have some colleges that do it and other colleges that, some high schools that do recommendations and others that do not. So you have to figure out where your counselor stands on that. If your counselor has a large caseload in terms of students, like if they're 400, 500, 600 to 1, it's more likely that you are going to be in a situation where your counselor is not writing extensive recommendations or is saying explicitly in the counselor recommendation, hey, I just wanted to let you know, like, we have 600 kids. There's no way I can do that. So that is a thing. However, I will say, and I've said this on previous videos, like, you do need to have a relationship with your counselor. And even if you haven't had that in the past, it's time to start that now, because a lot of times people will get contacted by the counselors and they'll say, hey, let's go ahead and get some information about this class that we're confused about, or this, essay, or get some more context on this, and they will reach out to the counselor. So one of the things that somebody asked me this week is like, hey, I don't have a relationship, so what should I do? And it's very straightforward to me. Just go up and say, hey, I know we don't have a relationship. I'm aware that we don't have a relationship. I do want to figure out how we're going to work together during college admission season. So can you tell me a little bit about that? And then go over your goals. And then are there things that you think that you're going to need context on? Any challenges? So if you were out of school for a hospitalization or you had a major incident, you do need to let your counselor know so that if the school contacts, and it's not a frequent thing, but if the school contacts, you do have your admissions officer getting some context from your counselor. It's not awkward or weird to say, hey, what's up? Like, we've never talked. I get that, but what are you going to be writing for my letter of recommendation for college, or your counselor recommendation? Do you do that? Do you need information from me? How is, like, the best way for us to work together? Are there schools based on what you're seeing that I should be examining? Are there schools, and this is a powerful question that a lot of students don't ask, are there schools on my list right now that, there's, or are there not schools? Are there not schools on my list that, okay, are there schools that should be on my list that are recruiting here? Because I would say that's the most powerful situation that you can be in as a student, is when a school is trying to break into a particular high school or a particular region, then they're going to be a little bit more lenient on the admissions expectations and requirements. So that being said, you should be aware. And if your school has history with a certain group of schools or school, you should know that too. So I know in particular, I live in Virginia. So Virginia Tech is one of our schools that people have a lot of questions about. And so, the counselors will tell us the macro data of, students with this type of schedule tend not to get into this type of program, or they like to see students with this, or I've never had a student be accepted with that. They can also tell you about trends, especially with financial aid. I think a lot of people think that their counselors don't know anything. And so they're like, well, I'm going to get scholarships. And a counselor can tell you very quickly off the bat, no, like this school doesn't give a lot of merit aid, and the gap that they present in terms of where you're at and where you're being funded to is going to be too significant for most scholarships to cover. So in that case, you definitely want to be aware of it, and that way you're not let down when if it does happen. If it doesn't work out in that way, fine. And then don't be afraid to update your counselor. So if you are able to get merit aid, that's data that the counselor can use and take so that they can become a better counselor in that situation. So yeah, if there's any questions, let me know. But I think for me, asking them their approach and asking them if they can see even the template that they're using, or what do I need to fill in for you, and recognizing that not everybody has a great relationship with their counselor. I don't think I had a great relationship with my high school counselor before admissions, but I did have a good working relationship with them my junior year because I was trying to increase my grades. And so that's what my counselor could write about and could talk about how I decided to take some rigorous courses, even though I knew that I wasn't going to be great at them and it may impact my GPA. But I also decided to do other things that I felt like were progressing. So you want to kind of make sure you have that kind of sweet spot there. But figuring out the best way to work with them. My favorite question to ask a counselor is there anything that you feel like I that most students don't realize that you're good at in terms of the admissions process? Like, is there something that you do well that nobody really knows, or how do other students underutilize you? So even if you're working with a private consultant, so I am a private consultant, I also do pro bono consulting. Even if you're working with that person, figuring out how they're going to work together. Some people are like, we don't talk to independent counselors. Other people are like, yeah, we can work with them, figure out things like that. I like to get feedback from the counselors, especially on the list. I think the one thing that people don't recognize is counselors have a good idea about placement of a student, like where they're ranking in the class. And I don't think a lot of people recognize or realize that placement in your class is going to really determine a lot of outcomes. So if you are in the top 10% of your class or the top 25% of your class, that's going to be a significant event for most admissions teams, because that is something that is tracked in terms of, ranking. So a lot of the rankings say how many of the students did you attract that are in the top 10% or top 25%. Anytime they're collecting data on a point, they're also collecting data from the students. And so they essentially have an incentive to try to enroll as many students in the top 10% or top 25%. And having a counselor tell you where you're at in your class, even if you don't have class rankings, can help you really be in a situation where you understand the type of schools you should be going after. Another thing that's come up recently, and I recently talked to an admissions officer about this, is we were talking about whether they're not necessarily a direct correlation, but like, okay, so if you're in the top 10% of your class, 90% of the people in your school are below you, right? And whether it does make sense based on that to say, okay, it does make sense for me to be applying to Ivies where they're rejecting 90% of the students, right? But then if you're in the top 25%, maybe you have an Ivy or two, but your list shouldn't have so many colleges that are rejecting 90%. So essentially, the question that I had for this admissions officer is, I know it's not a perfect science, but if a student's in the top 10% of their class, or if they're not in the top 10% of their class, should they be applying to colleges rejecting essentially 10% or less? And the answer was, of course, it depends, which is the standard answer for college admissions. But in general, it does seem that if you're applying to a college and you know other people are also from your school or from your district applying to that college and you're not in the top 10% or the top 25%, it doesn't necessarily always make sense to be applying to colleges that are not in the top, or are rejecting 90% of the students. So you kind of want to know where your placement is. I think some of the feedback I've gotten when students are rejected or waitlisted or even deferred is like they're not in the top 10%, they're not in the top 25%. And so I do match a lot of times the list to where the students place. That becomes really tricky, very tricky in schools where there's not a lot of class rankings and things like that because they've gotten rid of them. In my district in particular, they do not have class rank. But you kind of get a sense of like, am I doing 90% better? Like when I look at my peers, am I doing better than 90% of them? If the answer is no, then it's not that you shouldn't apply to an Ivy League. It's more that you should be focusing on the colleges that essentially match where you're currently at. So what I mean by that is like expand the list. So if I'm in the top, let's say 30%, I'm going to be applying to colleges that are rejecting about 30 to 50% of students, and then having some colleges in the 50 and 60, maybe 75% range. I see a lot of commentary right now on TikTok about lists and things like that. I'm very concerned that a lot of students are unaware what a reach is and what a target is. I don't subscribe to that language, but I know it's very popular, so I'll go ahead and utilize it. So what I see a lot is a lot of students will say, this college, let's use a concrete example. So I see a lot of people saying University of Michigan, that is my, target school, and they're not from Michigan. Or they'll say Georgia Tech, that's my target, and they're not from Georgia. Or they'll say Virginia Tech, and they're not from Virginia, right? And like that's listed as a target school. If it's out of state and it has state rules in terms of who needs to be at the school, like if there's regulations on them needing to take students from the in-state, then it's not necessarily a target school, if that makes sense. So if it's out of state and it's public, it's probably not a target. That's what I would probably say. Especially if they're not accepting, I would say more than 60% of the students. If they're accepting 60%, that's fine. But if they're not, if colleges are not accepting more than 60%, it's not really a target for me in terms of the public school situations. If you have questions, you can leave them. But yeah, so when I look at a student's list, a list for me determines what the season's going to look like. So you can determine, like, first of all, 50% of the colleges in this country accept more than 50% of the applicants. And those are colleges that include things like Virginia Tech. There's a lot of colleges that people don't realize are accepting 50% because we have this narrative that college admissions is so competitive, but we don't recognize that a lot of colleges are accepting a lot of students, especially now as we see students starting to apply to 10, 15, 20 colleges. You're going to see acceptance rates kind of going up, especially when, one, you have students applying to so many, but then two, you no longer have rankings penalizing colleges for doing higher acceptance rates. So that being said, One thing somebody asked me this week was if I see my college on a lot of students' lists when they're posting like influence and de-influence my college admissions list, should I be concerned or worried? Not that you should be concerned, but for me, if I saw my college listed on multiple people's Instagram, and I would say University of Michigan is like a perfect example of this, it's no longer a target or a safety, even though I don't, again, don't really love those terms. Um, that's a competitive college. And so I think one of the things that people don't do enough of is figuring out which colleges am I really just donating money to in terms of admissions and fees. So what you see is a lot of people will be donating their money because they don't really have a fair shot at that college. So for me, if you're out of state Michigan and maybe your school doesn't have a great relationship with University of Michigan, that's a donation for me. Doesn't mean that you're not going to get in, but it does mean curb your expectations, get your expectations down, and things like that. But when I look at some of the colleges that come up a lot, like Boston College comes up a lot, Boston University comes up a lot, UGA, Alabama, Fordham is coming up more and more and more. Miami comes up a lot. When you look at those particular colleges, if all those students are, all these students on TikTok are interested in that college, it's no longer target. And I feel like what a lot of the advice is like do 3 reach, 3 safeties, 3 targets, 3, safety target. Did I get all of them? Reach, safety, target. Yeah, I think I got them all. For me, I'm doing more targets and safeties, and I'm also making sure that 75% of my list is something where the student can afford that option, even if no money was offered, or if I look at the average amount of money the college offers in terms of merit aid and scholarships. Because I think people don't recognize, like, there is this narrative, apply, apply, apply to all these scholarships. You can have a student apply for 100, 150 scholarships, 200 and get 0, or even get such a small amount that it's not going to impact the overall balance. So you want to make sure that your list is more stacked with reasonable options. And I would have the conversation with your student, or as a student with your parent right now, about how much they're going to pay for college and what are the cutoffs. Are there schools that they're willing to pay more for? Which schools are they? What characteristics do they hold? Things like that. So for me, that's something I've been looking at a lot, is a list, because a list will tell me if the student's going to get accepted, and a list will also tell me if the student's going to be broke. I can look at a list at this point and say, okay, or even mid-season when students are getting acceptances and rejections, I can look at the remainder of the list and say, okay, we're in a good position, or no, we're not, and we need to expand our options, or this student applied too narrowly, and I need to prepare that student, especially when we start to see decisions coming back. Another thing that people have talked about this week, and I've kind of discussed a little bit in my dealings with other people, is early admissions. Not a fan, really. I know a lot of people are fans of early admissions, and I know like the common narrative is that it's easier to get in when it's early. I think that discounts a lot of things. So there's data about early admissions that people don't really discuss. One is like the deferral and waitlist rates. And then the second thing is not just the deferral and waitlist rates, but also, who's in that pool that's making the rate higher. So if we were to remove all the legacies, all the athletes, especially the athletes, because athletes are always encouraged to apply early so that they know, okay, we have this student committed to this team, and we don't have to look for this position anymore because they have signed something binding and now they're going to be here. Great, moving on. Those students yeah, they're getting a yes, but they would have always gotten a yes, if that makes sense. But then if we look at early statistics for, I don't even want to say normal students, but like normies, no, normal students, um, a lot of students, especially in the middle class, the upper middle class, you're going to get deferred. That's just the reality. So I hate watching people rush to early just to be deferred, because the deferral will create so much anxiety, and you don't recognize or realize in admissions, like you don't realize that this is a common practice. Like, I think there can be anywhere between 70 and 90% of the students deferred. So yeah, they got you in, and they got you like to indicate that you have a high level of interest, which is good for them. But they're also like, like, we're going to wait and see what the class looks like and how it fills out, or, we need some more information. We especially need mid year grades. So I think there's not a harm in rushing to early. Just be prepared. So if I get rejected from these particular colleges, already be working on the next set of colleges for regular admissions, because you are going to see, and I think especially this year, you are going to see a lot of deferrals early. It happens every year. It's just that some of us are here every year and others of us are going through this one time, right? So be prepared for that, and don't think it's abnormal or unusual for you to be deferred early. Hello, people that joined. So I'm not always in a huge rush to do early. For me, the defining factor of whether a student should apply early comes down to grades and rigor. If they're taking more rigorous classes in their senior year, I'm probably going to wait. So if they don't have a history of taking a lot of rigorous classes, but their senior year they have piled on to a bunch of rigorous classes, I'm probably going to wait, because the rigor is going to be the thing that pushes them over the edge. And they're usually going to be deferred from early admissions, because they're waiting to see how you do in those classes. The second thing I like to use as a deciding factor on whether a student's going to apply early is I like to look at it's essentially the trends of the grade. So if I close the book on a student and I say, we're not going to consider anything but your junior year, and like that student's in a good position, then I'm willing to go ahead and submit them, right? But if this student has more growing to do, or they have a significant event in the fall, or they need that grade boost, then I'm probably going to wait till regular, because again, what I see is a lot of students will end up in an early pile and just get deferred because we're waiting on mid-year grades, which brings up the topic of mid-year grades, which is probably the most overlooked, underutilized strategy in college admissions. So I didn't mean to do like a dramatic pause there, but in terms of if I was talking to an admissions officer and I said, would you rather have a great essay going into committee, so admissions committee, or good mid-year grades? And it's like, good mid-year grades. It's like, okay, would you rather have great activities or good mid-year grades? Good mid-year grades. I think, and this happens every year, that so many students will focus on their college applications and their grades will drop. And so a straight A student or an AB student all of a sudden gets a C. And then they're like, well, I can make it up later. Like, I was focusing on admissions, and they don't realize that they're going to be deferred, right? And so then that creates a very snowballing effect. And what I mean by that is students, again, mostly middle class students, get deferred. It's not unusual. There's, again, a 70 to 90% ratio in terms of students who do get deferred in early admissions for a lot of schools that are the most competitive in the country. The student gets deferred. They start to think, oh my God, I thought I was in a good position for college admissions. They're taking it personally because you wrote a personal essay. So I never understand when admissions officers are like, don't take it personally. You made it personal, but okay. They end up giving a lot of students, the student takes it in their mind and says, okay, I got deferred. Now their grades are spiraling as well. And they're mentally spiraling as they start to think about, like, maybe I'm not going to be able to meet my goals or my dreams. And like, now I have to prepare all of these things. And what you see is the list tends to expand after a student gets deferred because they're now scared of a lack of opportunity. And so that scarcity produces a lot of panic. And that panic leads to one, bad grades, and then two, a really broad list of options that maybe the student shouldn't be applying to. And then at the end, the parents and the students are usually fighting over which college to go to because, yeah, that was a school that I put on my list and I wasn't serious about, but they gave me a lot of money now. So now do I have to go to that school and things like that? But mid-year grades for me are the game changer in admissions. Like, for me, it goes rigor in terms of what classes are you taking in school. We could talk about online courses and things like that later that are not officially a part of your school curriculum. What classes are you taking that are rigorous? And then how well are you doing in them? And then mid-year grades kind of will strengthen or weaken anybody's argument. What about a school? Hold on. Oh, okay. Guys, I'm like bad at reading too. So what about students with highest rigor, 4.5, but got a C junior year? It depends on what the C is in. So can you give me context on what is a C in? If it's not in one of your majors, but if it's in a core class, it might be an issue. But if it's not in a core class, like it's an elective or it's a harder elective, like engineering, principles of engineering or something like that, then maybe. Why are middle class students deferred more often? Oh, okay. Are you applying humanities? Okay. I'm gonna finish the major and then I'm gonna go into the longer discussion about why middle class students end up deferred. Um, it was in pre-calc humanities major. Can you tell me the humanities major exactly? And like what type of schools are you looking at? For me, would I have I personally might go for it, but it anticipate deferrals. So you can still go early, just anticipate more deferrals in college admissions when that does happen, because they're probably going to want to see how you do in calculus. Um, I think the biggest mistake I see, and people don't like when I say this, but it's true, is students switching to stats because they're like, it's going to be an easy A, and I just want to move into stats, and I don't have to worry about calculus. You have a foundation in calculus because you took pre-calc. You do not have a foundation in whatever. With history, I wouldn't be as worried, but just don't be surprised if you get deferred and make sure it's your priority to get a B or higher in calculus, if that makes sense. For me, I would apply, but I would apply with caution, if that makes sense. Um, Waiting is not going to hurt you either. Why do middle class students get deferred? Because middle class students are harder to place. So when we look at this whole system of college admissions, when we look at everything that's happening, a lot of it's run on algorithms, and I don't think a lot of people know that. But there's algorithms that essentially say, like, hey, this is how much you should offer this student. This is how much you should give this student. This is how much is going to entice them to come. So essentially, it's like an MSRP on a car, where it's like, okay, that's the sticker price, but what is the price that we are going to pay for the actual car, not the sticker price, right? It's harder with middle class students to get a sense of how much should we offer them to entice them to come. And then some schools are also waiting on they're waiting on a level of interest, even though it's not technically demonstrated interest, to see how much you're following up and how interested you are after that deferral point, right? There's some schools like Northeastern that have demonstrated interest, and there's other schools that don't. But Slate, which is a CRM, which is a customer management tool, is tracking like emails that you open, videos that you open, what pages are you going to, things like that. So for me, what I see as middle class students to get more, because we know how much we have to offer the rich students. Zero, right? Like we know that. They tend to get, it's really upsetting, but they do tend to get pretty generous offers. But for middle class students, you don't know if they're in a situation where the equity is tied into their home and therefore their money is tied up. And if their money is tied up, then if I give them an offer right now and say, like, okay, you'll get $20,000 off, then are they going to come, right? Also, it's easier to manage the budget because they have an amount of revenue that they want to hit. So what I see as somebody who works with students who are very, very wealthy, and then students who are in the middle class, upper middle class, students who are in the upper middle class, but most of the money's in the house, students who are in the upper middle class, and they have access to a lot of money, I tend to see a lot more deferrals in the middle class. Like that's low income students tend to also go on to the extreme. So it's just that middle portion where they don't know how interested you are and they don't know how much to offer you, or they're waiting to see like, okay, we're about to make these bunch of offers that are super generous. Let's wait to see how that comes in, and then we can come back to these students. There are arguments about whether people, when they're making admissions offers and deferring students, if they're really genuinely coming back to look at all the students. And I would say yes, and that's a weird thing to say, but I do feel like students get a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance because I think people are thinking this file only gets read once or twice and then they make a decision. And if they defer, they're going to be reading it again. But it can be as nuanced as, you know, we need some people from 90210, that particular zip code. We need that this year. So let's pull all the kids from 90210. And then it's like, okay, well, we over enrolled in 90210. So let's look at students in the Midwest, or we need more students who have this particular characteristic or that particular characteristic. We don't have enough students who are interested in history or humanities. We have way too many students. So yeah, I would say that with that being said, you do want a situation, I'm sorry, like I'm getting distracted by the comments, but you do want a situation where students are reviewed again because they're put into different piles. And so the way that I would explain it, and I am a tactile person, so excuse me, but essentially they're like, okay, we need all the students from, 90210. So we're going to pull every single thing, and then we're going to look through and say, okay, this student was deferred. I agree with that. Let's keep it moving. Let's say waitlist. Now this student was accepted. Well, now based on the class that we're admitting, the student's no longer competitive. This is a no. And then they might say this student that got a no, they may say, okay, now we need students who have a music major. And this student happens to have a music major. Now they're being reviewed in a different context. Does that make sense? Okay, let's see. My college is in-state safeties. An out-of-state top 20s. Is that smart? Also, I'm really low income. Out of state, if it's out of state and you've seen it on a bunch of TikTok lists, it's not a safe school. I would just say top 20s are not safe for me. Like if it's in the top 20, US News and World Report, even though I don't love those rankings and I think they're utterly absurd and don't seem to do a great job, if it's top 20, it's not safe. Like for me, a top 20 application, even as somebody who's gotten students into, I cannot think of a school in the top 20 that I have not helped a student be admitted to over the last 10 plus years. But I would say, in my mind, I think of those as donations. So I'm not, those are lotteries for me. Does that make sense? It doesn't mean you shouldn't apply to them, but they are lotteries. And for me, a lottery is something where a student is going to be in a position where geographic diversity might play an impact, institutional priorities are going to play a heavier impact. So when you're looking out of state, if it's public, not private, because private's a whole different matter. But if it's public and it's out of state, I would just be wary because they might say we want more students from the East Coast, or we want more students from this particular college, or we want our high school, or we want less students from this particular region. So it becomes less subjective and more objective. And I feel like admissions is actually very objective. People don't want to admit that, but it can come down to factors that are not really in your control. Like I can't control if I'm applying from Tennessee. Does that make sense? So for me, any school that, I'm going to be honest, any school that's below 25 to me is not, if they're rejecting 75% of their applicants, it's not a safe school. And if it's out of state, but they're accepting 50% of their applicants, but then when we look at out of state numbers, that's not holding up, it's not a safe school. You can still apply, but just be prepared. And then definitely get fee waivers. 100% get fee waivers for applications. And this is my thing. Everybody will say like, okay, only low income students should be applying for fee waivers. Everybody should be applying for fee waivers, especially in this economy, unless you are uber wealthy. And I will say, if you're uber wealthy, it's not a great look to be asking for fee waivers, but ask for fee waivers and have your counselor advocate, hey, I have a student that's really interested. Can you help with a fee waiver? Even if they say no initially, go to your counselor. And that's a way to express interest in a school and to have the counselor start building that relationship that you may need. But I'm a transfer well funded. Okay. Is it a private high school? Or is it public? Okay. Is it a specialty program? Sorry. Is it a specialty program? This is what I mean when I say stats are a horrible way to make admissions decisions, because like these are like the little context that I need. So it's a public school. No, just really rich. Okay. Okay, sorry, one more. Do you feel like now, I don't know if you have class rank or not, but do you feel like you're in the top 10% or no of your class? Oh, that's happened here too. Like they made their own district to stay away from the quarries. Yeah, that's happened here as well. Um, I will say, so that's a context that I would need for the application. Okay, so if you're not in the top 10%, top 20 schools, it's not that a top 20 school is not accessible. There are places where it's going to happen, but especially this particular year where the federal government is threatening to take data from admissions and sue colleges for not admitting on merit. I would say top 20s are going to be a super, I don't like to use the term reach, but like a super reach, if that makes sense. In that top 20, they are, especially for US News and World Report, they are reporting how many students are coming in from the top 10%. Now, there are colleges where you're in a situation where you apply and based on everybody else who's applying, you look super great. But there are going to be some colleges where it's like I'm applying and 5 other people are applying. And if I'm not in the top 10, then they're not going to be able to report that I'm in the top 10. So now they have to take a risk to admit me, if that makes sense. And not necessarily like they're thinking of it as a bad thing, but they're not getting points in the same way, they're going to get a point for a student in the top 10, because every student in the top 10 contributes to the number of students that were admitted in the top 10, or the number of students who were admitted in the top 25. In those situations where I'm looking at rejection or acceptance rates of 90, 80, 70%, I just start assuming that those are one, objective. So they're not going to be situations where I'm spending a lot of time on the application, although I don't spend a lot of time on most applications. And then two, it's going to be in a situation where I'm like, okay, I know that I can be rejected. I'm not going to take it personally, and it's not going to impact the rest of my search. I would say in that situation, the other thing I would not be doing is applying binding. Binding is not going to necessarily increase the probability. It's probably going to increase the deferral rate, and I don't really know how to explain that, but that's just what I see. But I would do my best to get closer to the top 20 or top 10% of my school in that situation. So I would be banking on mid-year grades, and mid-year grades could help if you are deferred from one of those top 20, if that makes sense. Okay. So don't see a top 20 as a safety. I mean, I would like only apply go out of state for a top 20. Yeah. I mean, I think anticipate deferral, which is what I said earlier. Anticipate that you might get deferred. And so your reliance on your mid-year grades is going to be heavier than other applicants, in my experience. So for me, when a student is saying like, hey, I'm not at the top, but I want to apply to some of these top schools, right? I want to do as maybe 2 applications early, at most non-binding. And then I want to put the rest in when I get the mid-year grades, because I need the student to come in and have like really strong mid-year grades. If my SAT score is really low, should I try to get it up, or test optional? Okay, so test optional is actually my favorite topic, because as a former SAT tutor, I think the thing to know about test optional is, one, it's not for particular students. Like, there's this idea that it's for this type of students, or for this type of students. Should I apply test optional? Should I not apply test optional? Etc. 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 Everybody who's wanted to go back to test required has now had that opportunity. Like, there were schools that were forced into test optional, and I remember this very well. They definitely didn't want to do it, but then they were like, okay, I have to, because the pandemic, except for if you were living in Florida. And so everybody who's wanted to go back to requiring scores are people who rely on scores and have scores really baked into their process. Everybody who's test optional now, who's had the opportunity to go back and chosen not to go back, is saying to you, if you don't feel like your score reflects your capabilities, then just apply test optional. And so for me, the retake question, if you're within 150 points, so let's say you have a 1200 and your ideal score is like a 1250, yeah, that makes sense, because less than 150 points. But you have to start managing your time and saying, what am I taking away? If studying for the SAT does not allow me to get the best mid-year grades, I'm absolutely not taking the SAT again. I also caution people, because I do find, as somebody who did test prep for a while, October tends to be low scores, November tends to be low scores, September, I know they added the low scores, August tends to be pretty low scores. You don't see the scores starting to go up until like the end of the season. And so a lot of students are holding on to their applications and then taking an October test, and then it didn't change that much. I see the biggest score jumps in the late winter or early winter months. So kind of November, but then mostly December. If it's going to distract from your mid-year grades, then don't do it. If they're test optional, that means that they have chosen to be test optional at this point. So for me, when a school has made that choice, then I respect them. Oh, okay. So that is definitely, it's just my junior year. I had a lot of work, but I feel like I'll have. Okay, so let me answer the first question. If you had a lot of work, that is something for sure that one, you want to put in the Common App, and then two, because there is like a background section or whatever, I forgot what it's called. And then two, you want to make sure that you note that in your additional information. Like, I know a lot of people are doing weird things with their additional information. For me, it's just bullet points of information that fills in the gap. And so explaining that and then having an adult also explain that, it's going to be really, really helpful for college admission. So if you can get somebody else to say, she wasn't able to stay after class or stay late because she was working with her family, things like that. So in that situation, I would make sure that the context is there. In terms of, will it be easier to get into a top 2025 if there's a drop in international students? I would have said yes before the federal government announced that they were collecting data. And now it's never necessarily easy to get into a top 2025. And I think it's not for the reasons that a lot of people think. What people tend to think is like the application is what changes top 25 applications from accept to reject. For me, it comes down to random things that you're not thinking about. Like, I'll have a student that did some courses outside of the school, and because they're outside of the school, they're technically not ranked in the top 10, or a school wants more individuals from a particular region and they do not care about Virginia applicants or things like that. Those are the things that I tend to see in top 20 applications when I'm talking to individuals. I will say, in the years that I've been doing this, and I'm going to have to go back and look at comments, in the years that I've been doing this, I cannot tell you the last time somebody's said to me it was because of this in the application. Does that make sense? So for me, I have never seen a student rejected on applications. And in fact, I think the most infuriating thing is like, they're like, oh, I loved it and I was advocating for the student, but it didn't match the institution. So the institution has priorities, and the priorities can shift throughout the year. For me, a great book on this is Jeff Salingo, and it's Who Gets In and Why. You can just do the audiobook. I think it's chapter 3 or 4 where they go into Emory's process and they talk about how Emory's making decisions on college admissions, and how one person was like, I love this essay. It's a beautiful essay. I love this Common App essay. Oh my God, I'm loving this student. And then based on some other factor, the student didn't get in. And then based on another factor, the student was reconsidered. So that's it. So, okay, hold on. I have to go back, y'all. I'm not good at this at all. Okay, wait. Okay. I am, okay, Brian, okay. I am unhooked, CS major, and dealing with course rigor, near perfect, 1B. Are you top 10% of your class, Brian? Freshman year is my, okay. On the common data set, and listen, Brian, I'm going to let you know people don't like this opinion, but on the common data set, how data is collected will tell you how data is viewed in college admissions office. So on the common data set, it is 1450, I believe. Let me look to make sure. 1450 or higher is like the top range for the SAT. After 1450, we don't care. Now, I will say the exceptions for that for me are Georgetown and MIT. And maybe a little now because I'm so used to Caltech being test free, but Caltech would be another one that I would probably not go into it without a 15. But for most colleges, a 1470 and a 1510 in their mind, same box is going to be checked. Does that make sense? So would I retake as long as it didn't impact my mid-year grades and it didn't take a lot of energy and time. At 1450, let me see if I can get this book. Yeah. At 1450, the book that I would recommend is actually this book. It's called the SAT Black Book. This is good for students. This is not good for every student. Please do not use it if you're not the student, but students in the 1450s, like students above, I would say 1400, who are trying to break ground, this is the book that I use with them the most often, and I see the results because it's more theory based. And do not just get this book and like only look at the actual strategies. I feel like the best part of this book and the most powerful part is this opening where it says, please read this first. Okay. But would I retake for top 20, top 25? Not necessarily. Hold on. Common data. If you can give me a particular college, and I can tell you. But yeah, should I take that? You could, okay. Somebody said, hi, should I mention in additional information that I could take certain AP or AP classes? Do you mean you couldn't take or you could take? J. I don't know. Okay, y'all, I'm old. So if you like start using acronyms, it's not going to register. Oh, you couldn't take what is BO? What class is that? BOCES? What class is that? Sorry. Okay. Okay, I don't love passion projects, but Brian, I'm gonna answer yours. I built a free AI power. It reaches 5. Oh, but I do like this. Okay. It's not gonna come down to. Okay, guys, I can't. It's not going to come down to your passion project. Is this a good Yes, it's a good passion project if you're actually passionate about it. I will say passion projects are not my favorite because they tend to lack a lot of depth. It's just kind of like volunteering for the sake of volunteering. You can kind of see a natural progression with a student that's actually doing genuine volunteer work. So what I mean by that is like maybe they start in the student senate, then they go to the big student senate where they represent their school for the entire district. Then they start going to board meetings, and they're like at the board meetings, they decide, you know what, I need to get more state officials aware. So they start lobbying. There's a progression there that passion projects and fake, clubs tend to try to replicate. So yeah, I would say I like the passion project as long as you're passionate about it, because I will say if a student does not actually care about their passion project, like they don't actually care about it, then it reflects in the essay. Like the essays feel lukewarm or tepid because they were just doing it for the sake of doing it. Doesn't mean that you're not going to get in, because you can still get in. It will be marked yes for initiative, but how much is that initiative really going to carry over? So the thing that I mean by that is like, if I'm sitting in the committee and I'm like, okay, this student made something that with an AI, and and one of the most interesting lines I heard about it was XYZ, and this other person's like, well, I have a student that did AI as well, but they don't have any context in the application that created that depth, then that's going to be a problem. Okay, if you're number one in your school, that's gonna be higher than anything else. So if I have a 1470 and I'm below the top 10%, I'm not really worried, because again, common data set starts at 1450. So a lot of admissions officers know less than you think. I had to explain the SAT to one of them because they were surprised somebody could increase by 50 points, and I was like, that's not unusual. And that was for a very competitive school. But if you are looking at that and it's like, okay, I can get a point in US News and World Report ranking. So if you look at the US News and World Report rankings, it says how many students did you admit in the top 10%, how many students did you admit in the top 25%? That is going to be more valuable than most things, because now when I admit you, I get a point. Does that make sense? Can I say the reason I couldn't take certain classes is because limited my schedule? Okay, you can say your schedule was limited. You can, but get an adult to back it up. Does that make sense? If your counselor's doing a letter, that would be really helpful. It's not necessarily fair, and I hesitate to say this, because some admissions officers, when I talk to them, they're like, yeah, but kids can say anything on an application. So they can be like, I couldn't take it, and they could have, right? I don't tend to use the additional information for excuses necessarily, but like just context. So I'm not going to write a long essay in there. I usually do bullet points, and I'm just like, wanted to take this class, but it conflicted with this core class, and I couldn't take it, right? So I think one year we had a student who wanted to do a leadership class, but in order to do that leadership class, they would have to drop down a level in math, and they didn't recommend it. So, or I didn't recommend it. The college didn't recommend it as well. So that was the bullet point that we used that year. For MIT, the main thing is my math is a 790. Yep. Top three GPAs. Okay. Mm-hmm. So the reading and writing score is the low one. Have you tried taking the ACT? I would probably take an ACT, because I find that students who tend to do well in math on the SAT do better on reading and writing on the ACT, because it's more straightforward and more similar to the classroom presentation. MIT is not going to come down for, I don't see, hold on, let me pull up MIT. I think the last time I looked at the MIT Common Data Set, they don't have a lot of students who are in that 1400 range. But let's see. Okay, so they have 8.3. If you can just get if you're at a 690 and you can just get it to a 700, then you bump up into the category. 8.3% of students who were admitted last year did have 600 to 699. 0.3 had a 500 to 599. So for me, I would say if a student came to me with that, I would probably have them retest just to get to a 700 in the reading and writing for the super score. The only other school that I always say is Georgetown, and Georgetown keeps track of how many times you take the test. Okay. They do care more about the math. However, I will say, yeah. Which limits? Okay. I lost track. I'm sorry, guys. Okay, so you take half a day of school and then you gain certification for careers. That is very important context. Is it the one thing I would ask is it on the school profile? So the school profile, like if I'm trying to look for a student's school profile, is you just type it in your high school name and then school profile, and what you'll see is the school profile, right? And on the school profile, it might say some of our students take half a day for working programs. But if that's not the case, then you want an adult to vouch for you. Does that make sense? I like to have a counselor vouch in that case. Gain certifications at my home school. Okay. Where should the adult say it? In the counselor recommendation, or in the teacher recommendation. I would have all of my people say it, and I would have them say it as only, and then I would put it at the top of my bullet list for additional information. I think that's the thing that I always worry about when I see a lot of people talking about like bulking up their additional information with like these essays and things. The way millennials turn off and don't read things, I think you have to remember like a lot of your admissions readers are millennials. Bullets help significantly. And so I see people saying like you need to do this or you need to, write this passion or like put up this paragraph in the additional. You need it to be short, sweet, and to the point. Like for me, I always think about if my friend is trying to go home on a Friday, are they reading that? Right. And if it takes more than 5 seconds, it's not good. So I have the adults say it in the recommendation letters. I have them say it in the first paragraph. I have the students say it in additional information in the first bullet point. Okay. Don't worry about the spelling mistakes. Oh my gosh. I got, okay. I don't, because it asked me to do a puzzle and I don't know why. Okay. Not that I'm doing the puzzle. Okay. Oh, okay. Keep the bullets as short as possible for additional information, please. I would recommend that. Keep the bullets as short as possible. I have to get off soon because I have an appointment coming up. But for me, I like to say, like for me, I would say had to like, and I listen. All's fair in love and war. So for me, I emphasize work. I had to work because I'm not rich. I had to work. So I could only take a limited class. Like I had a half day at school, so it limited the amount of classes. I wasn't able to sign up for these particular classes. Bullet. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What I try to do to improve the situation, would I say that in there? No, because you're not trying to prove anything. I think that's like one of the biggest misconceptions about college admissions. You're not actually trying to prove anything to them or like explain anything. You're just trying to give them context. Like the reason you're not going to see this is because of this. The simpler it is, the better it's received in my experience. Does that make sense? So I would just say school participates in this particular program, something that they can Google and see what comes up when you Google it. And for me, I like to do a Google search. I know this is like very niche, but like I like to do a Google search at the library because I want to see what somebody who's never searched in my region or on my particular computer is searching. I don't want to see my own search results, but I go to a library and I see let's say it's called Project Star, where students work after school. What do people see? You can give them a link, but yeah, see if it says that and let that do the talking because they're going to Google it if they can. And then I would have the adults explain the program, but then I would just say unable to take this, and this, or you can even say attempted to take this, and this, but was unable to due to restrictions within the program. Does that make sense? But you're not trying to convince anybody. Like I'm never trying to sell on the application. I'm just trying to connect the dots. So I will say, as I kind of get ready to get off of here, one of the things that I feel like changed after I did this for a lot longer than 1 or 2 or 3 cycles is I started to realize my best applications were not where I was trying to sell somebody, but I was trying to explain something. And when I was sitting in a training, because some of us have training, when I was sitting in a training where we were going over applications and how they reviewed it, because that's obviously the best way for me as an admissions consultant to understand their approach and understand how to make my applications better. When I was sitting in on a committee, it struck me that I knew by the time we got to before I even got to the essay, I knew what I was looking for. So I'm looking at the grades. I'm like, the grades have dropped junior year. Why? And every letter of recommendation was like, this student's great. Like this student, based on everything that they were saying, this student was like going to be the next Nobel Prize winner. But I don't know why your grades drop. Do you see what I'm saying? So that little piece of context. Now, my decision was to defer or wait list and get more information, call the counselor. The school is a big school. They're not going to do that. They were like, no, we just rejected. Bad decision on my part. Or in my view, other counselors agreed. We talked to them about why that was problematic, especially for junior year, because you do tend to see a drop in junior year. I would have probably waited for mid-year grades to see if the student improved. Again, mid-year grades are probably the most important thing in college admissions that gets overlooked. But I will say that at that point, when I saw the grades drop, the only thing I was looking for at that point was, why did the grades drop? I did not care about anything else. And so you're looking with intention. You're not looking. Let me answer that question in a second. I'm looking with an intention. So all of this fluff actually got in the way. And what I mean by fluff is like these catchy hooks and these catchy essays and like these, hyperbolic and built up essays that sounded great. I was like, okay, but I still don't know why you dropped junior year. And that was the thing that made the decision a no, right? You want to keep it, you want to figure out, you want to look at your application after you do your activities and after you look at your grades and say, what are the questions, and like connect those dots and connect them as quickly as possible. And that's why for me, when I have a student write an essay, the first 2 lines are the most important. The first paragraph is the most important to me. I could care less what happens after the first paragraph, but if admissions reader is scanning it or an admissions officer is scanning it, I want the meaty part to stand out. So for that particular student, I would have said, let's address why you got C's, like a C. I got a C last year in IB physics due to a bad teacher. You should not blame the teacher. And they don't like that. They definitely don't like that. Did you stay after school? And also, what's your major? What major are you applying to? So I would say for me, physics and calc are the 2 ones where I don't care if a student has a C. Like, because it's the hard cores. Like, I expect to see there. Like, I don't expect to see in like English, even though I was a humanities major. I don't expect that. So for me, there are C's in admissions that are more valuable than others, if that makes sense. So a C in calc or a C in physics is not weighed as heavily as a C in history class. Does that make sense? Because the level of rigor is significantly different. If you're applying to a math major or a STEM major, that's going to be something I want to address. The reason I asked if you stayed after school is because if you stayed after school and the teacher knows that you were struggling, but you stayed after school and worked on it, then that teacher might be the best teacher to write the letter of recommendation, whether you like them or not. For me, I've had teachers who have given my students the letter of recommendations, and I've gotten a lot of good feedback from admissions officers about that, because I think one school, and I'm trying to decide if they have said this publicly. Yep, they have. Okay. George Washington was like, we love to see a C, because the first time a student fails is not going to be here, right? Like that gives them a little bit more confidence. Like the student got a C and kept going. So there are schools that actually do value a C, but it has to make sense. Like, and it can't be, I got all B's and then I got a C and like, this is the spot, but like my other grades are not significantly better, if that makes sense. Hold on, I'm gonna make sure I send this out because I have students that needs to join in like 50 minutes. I'm about to wrap up. If there's any other questions, oh, the teacher's not there anymore. Okay, if you got help from other teachers, get one of the other teachers to write it up. Does that make sense? Like, and I'm talking first paragraph. You know, this student was having a hard time in this teacher's class, and like make sure this is petty, but like the teacher's no longer here. And then, hey, and they stayed with me after school to work on it, because it now shows that you took initiative, which is a different level of involvement. Does that make sense? I don't know if it does, but I hope it does. Sorry, y'all, I'm working on two things at once. I'm trying to stay on as long as I can while I also send this to a student. Okay. Yes, okay. Yeah, so having, and then maybe for me, I would probably incorporate that into an essay. Like, so I tend to do one activity, one class, one theme. And so if I'm concerned about it, I don't want to overemphasize it, but like sometimes even saying I knew I was going to get a C, and like for me it was chemistry. I knew I was going to get a C in chemistry, and I took it anyway because I don't want to shy away from hard classes. Like I knew that this was not going to look good on my college application, but it doesn't mean that I shouldn't be taking it, if that makes sense. All right, I think that's it. We're going to try to go live more frequently and also give you guys opportunities to drop questions. I will create a form so that we have questions, but really appreciate it. I'm sad that I don't know how to work technology. I probably need to get one of my students to help me with comments on the live, but I hope I answered everybody's questions. If not, just leave it in a comment on one of my videos and I'll try to answer it there. Okay. I realize I don't know how to turn this off. Okay. Bye. And then let's turn it off here.